Greetings, students. Welcome to Chapter 6, Language. So let's jump right in. Before we begin, as usual, have your book out, and Chapter 6 starts on page 177, and be prepared to take some notes, and we'll just jump right in. Okay, so let's talk about a few things that we want to get out of this. One is to be able to analyze a real or potential misunderstanding in terms of semantic and pragmatic rules. Another is to describe how the principles presented in the section of this chapter titled The Impact of Language operate in your life. And next, construct a message at the optimal level of specificity or vagueness for a given situation. Next, recast you statements into I or we statements to reflect your responsibility for the content of messages. Next is to rephrase disruptive statements in less inflammatory terms. Lastly is, in a given situation, analyze how gender or culture differences or both may affect the quality of interaction. Okay, so let's look at this statement right here on the cover slide, on the title slide. And you can you can fast forward through this if you were in class, because this was our warm-up, remember? But just to take some time to think about and maybe put it on your list of things that you might summarize or write about in some way or address, is this idea that the greatest barrier to effective communication is the assumption that it occurred. And in the simplest terms, what that means is it's when I think that just because I'm talking, that communication occurred. And yes, I was talking and I am the sender, but communication is a process, as we can remember back to chapter 1. There's a whole process involved in communication. And so to assume that it occurred means that I'm assuming that what I'm saying, you understand. And that's a place where our growth can be, that we check for understanding when we're communicating, and not assume that just because we said it, it was heard and understood. Okay. So let's begin with this idea of language and just really the basic definition of language. We really take it for granted, but there's some interesting things to consider, which are that language is symbolic. And what does that mean? We use symbols to represent things. Okay, there's an arbitrary connection, and the word is not the thing it represents. So let's look at some examples. Here is a symbol for the number 5. Okay, 5 is not a thing. Okay, 5 is a symbol that represents 5 of something, if that makes sense. Okay, so the word is not the thing. Basically, what happened is, when languages were being developed, a language community got together and agreed that we would let these symbols stand for these items and things in our life. So other examples are that in other cultures, they don't have the same word for the same symbol, right? We know that. And so, for example, if you're in Alaska, snow is very important in your life versus being in Southern California, for example, right? So in Alaska, it makes sense that you'd have a lot more symbolic language to describe snow and the types of snow. For us, snow is snow. And for me, it's the best snow is the kind you can leave up in Tahoe. So this idea here of the red light. So the red light is stop? No, the red light isn't stop. Okay, it's symbolic for telling an agreed communication community, okay, that when the red light stands for stop, it means to stop. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to you, that language is symbolic. Okay, so just keeping in mind that the importance of understanding that language is symbolic is the fact that if you're coming from one language community and you're speaking in another language community, a lot of misunderstanding can occur. Okay, and here's some ways in which that can happen. So first, let's understand the semantic rules. So what are they? The assigned meaning to a particular linguistic symbol, usually a word, okay, It makes it possible for a language community to agree that a bike is a bike, or in Spanish, a bicicleta is a bicicleta, right? And for us, a book is a book, like your textbook, right? And or in Spanish, el libro is a libro, right? Thus, language is simply agreed upon words to symbolize objects, ideas, functions, and shared meaning, okay? And then that's the semantics. Okay, semantic misunderstanding. There are different kinds, right? Which means different meanings for the same word. So 3 common semantic misunderstandings are: one is equivocation, which is being purposely ambiguous, right? Look, you can look at that on page 180. Next is relative language. And I use the example of I live in a small town because I originally came from a small town in the East Bay area called Danville. And I moved from there to Davis, which is, again, another probably comparable small town, or at least it was 20 years ago. And so when I moved from Davis to Vacaville, to everybody that's kind of OG here, always would describe Vacaville as this quaint, small little town. And to me, it was not that. It was the opposite of that. The population was double. I got lost everywhere I went. The city to me was sprawling. Now, but now, there's a different aspect of relativity for me in terms of how I see Vacaville, because I've been here 20 years, and yes, it does now feel more like a small town. So yeah, so remember that there's this idea that of relative language. To you, what to you may be a small town may not be to me. The next is a static evaluation, which is that people are consistent and unchanging. Okay, so we can make semantic misunderstandings when we think that people are consistent and unchanging, right? So we don't want to make a static evaluation, and you can dive deeper in that on 181. And then the abstraction we're going to talk more about. Abstraction is vague language. It's on page 182, and you can take a look. I'm going to actually go to that page right now really quick. Look at the abstraction ladder, if you would. Okay, right at the top. Doesn't really look like a ladder, but is often described as a ladder. And I think I have some graphics coming up that show that. But what the idea of this abstraction ladder, this was created by a linguist, a very famous linguist, S.I. Hayakawa. And he used it to demonstrate how language can, depending on the level you are on this language, on this abstract ladder, it indicates how much abstraction there is. So if we look at the very first one, it says, you need to have a better attitude. Okay, that's very vague. About it, a better attitude about what? Okay, what kind of attitude? And what circumstances, right? Next, it says you need to be more positive. Oh, okay, so that's a little bit more concrete. However, positive about what? Okay. You need to complain less. Okay, that's more specific. Be more positive and complain less. Okay. And so you need to complain less and about working too hard. All right. And then finally, the most specific, which is at the bottom, you need to complain less about working overtime on weekends. There it is. So you start from you need to have a better attitude, which if your manager, supervisor is saying that to you, it's not very informative about concretely what it is that you could work on, right? And so we have to always be thinking about abstraction and how to lower the level of abstraction, okay? And so there are ways to do that. There's a really nice table on table 6.1, and it helps you to know how to give behavioral descriptions, okay? So look at that. And I will tell you that it's an on assessment 2, there is a question on this topic, okay, on how to lower the levels of abstraction. So if you're watching this, you just got a great advantage. So here's another one, an abstraction ladder. So this idea of wisdom, okay, you know, it generally means that you've learned a lot from experience and perhaps from the experience of other people. But what about what is it that you learned, right? So then insight is a little more specific, not much more. Understanding, oh, okay. And then knowledge, okay. And then information, and then data. So in this case, we are starting from an abstract and we're using other words that mean the same thing, but are much more concrete and specific. Data, okay? That one's just an okay description. This one I like better. So if we're starting at abstract, we can say information to give someone a little more information so they can actually visualize the information. You can say a publication. So now they might be seeing a book or a pamphlet, right? And then it's books, okay? So specifically the type of publication is a book. And even more specifically than that, what kind of book? A novel, okay? And then what kind of novel? A Pulitzer Prize winning novel. Great. What was the novel? To Kill a Mockingbird. And then to be the most concrete, we're talking about a specific copy of the book, my copy. Okay, so it's really important for you to understand abstraction or know when you're hearing it, to become more aware of identifying when you're being very kind of vague and abstract, and how to lower the level of abstraction for yourself, but also how do you know how to ask the right questions to get levels of abstraction lowered. So a quick example is a friend of mine, well, he's actually a man I used to date, and he was super vague. I nicknamed him Bullet Points because when he would talk to me, I would always have to dig for more information because it was so surfaced and so abstract. So I would tell him, I said, you're like an outline with just the headings and no bullet points, no subpoints. And we joked about that a lot, but it was really a lot of heavy lifting for me to get him from a level of abstraction to the concrete area where I can actually understand what he's saying, because that's the problem right there, is I did not actually understand what he was saying, and what he was saying was important to me. So I wanted the meaning. And that's what this does. Okay. One particular time I ran into him not too terribly long ago, and he said, I saw you. Okay. So, okay, you saw me. Okay, so now here's me asking the question to lower the level of abstraction. Where did you see me? Oh, in the intersection downtown. Okay, that's a little more specific. And where was I? Oh, you were on Elmira and Peabody. Oh, okay. He said, yeah, I saw you at the light, but you didn't see me. So I had to do a lot of digging to get to that point. So hopefully that helps you, because you will be writing about that on your next assessment. So we had semantic rules, right? Now we're going to look at syntax. So semantic rules explain how meaning is assigned. Okay, I think that's pretty clear. And then syntactic rules govern how meaning is changed by grammar. So there's two letters on page 183. They're actually quite comical, and they sound funny when you read them. So I'll read them. So version 1 says, Dear John, I want a man who knows what love is all about. You are generous, kind, thoughtful. People who are not like you admit to being useless and inferior. You have ruined me for other men. I yearn for you. I have no feelings whatsoever when we're apart. I can be forever happy. Will you let me be yours? Mary. Okay, let's listen to this version and how syntactic rules have changed the meaning. Okay. Dear John, I want a man who knows what love is. All about you are generous, kind, thoughtful people who are not like you. Admit to being useless and inferior. You have ruined me. For other men, I yearn. For you, I have no feelings whatsoever. When we're apart, I can be forever happy. Will you let me be? No change in the words, just changes in the commas, right? So that's another, writing in a syntactic way. It's very important that you have agreed upon set of syntax, which generally our grammar has an agreed upon set of rules for grammar. However, a misplaced comma can absolutely change the meaning of a phrase or a sentence, right? Okay, pragmatic. The pragmatic rules govern the way speech operates in everyday interaction and are usually unstated. So what are we talking about here? So pragmatic is, what are the pragmatic rules governing these statements? How's it going? That's a common statement. You might say something a little different, like, hey, what's up? Or however you say it, but it's same meaning, how's it going? And ask yourself, when you ask that question, are you actually waiting for a response? Or is that a pragmatic rule that it's very common for us to say that in passing without intending to hear an answer. Okay, so think about that, because sometimes a person would like to be taken seriously. So if you're saying, how's it going, but you don't wait to hear an answer, like me, if people ask me, not all people, but people that I'm closer to will ask me, how's it going? I actually think they mean it, and I actually answer honestly. And then other times, depending on the person, I say, great, or not so bad. How's it going for you? Right? Super casual. What about the statement, would you like a drink? What is assumed when someone says, would you like a drink? Generally, it's an alcoholic beverage. So the pragmatic rules that govern in our language culture, our language community, would you like a drink? It's generally referring to alcohol, versus would you like something to drink? Then the person is really asking you for a variety. You've got a variety of choices of something to drink. So I want you to think about and possibly write about in your summary about any pragmatic mishaps you may have encountered, or you may have seen from somebody else. Okay, so that'd be a great thing to write about. Okay, so language is power. We have, look at the table. It's table 6.3 on 189. Okay, I'll turn there too, just in case I want to refer to it. It's at the bottom of 189. Okay, all right. This may be one of your questions as well. Okay, so we have powerless speech mannerisms, language patterns that detract from a speaker's power to influence others. So one of them is what we call hedges. It's when you're feeling you're not so certain about what you're saying, less confident, and because you use like words like I'm kinda and I guess. A really good example of that is I just did a financial transaction between myself and another person, and we were trying to negotiate on how we should split a fee, and I personally felt she should pay the whole fee, and she thought I should pay half of it. And so when she said, yeah, well, I think maybe we should just split it, I didn't see that coming, so my answer was, I guess. Right? That's a hedge. Instead of me saying, no, can we talk more about that? I'm not sure I agree with that, right? So I hedged. Hesitations are things like, well, right? So again, let me remind you, this is patterns of powerless speech. These are the mannerisms that many of us have. So I want you to be thinking about which of these you can relate to, and perhaps even some that aren't on here, and consider writing about them in your summary. So next would be intensifiers, like I'm really and I'm not very. Okay, so that's meaning that you are needing to really support how you feel with an intensifier, and instead, the feeling that you're feeling is legit, right? So it's okay to say how you're feeling or what you think, instead of I'm not real, I'm really or I'm not very. What about polite forms like excuse me and pardon me? Do you ever overuse those? Right? I mean, there's always time to be polite, but what about when we're using them in a way that is reflecting powerlessness, like insecurity? And then there are tag questions. So here's an example. It's about time we got started, isn't it? So it's what's after that comma, isn't it? That's the tag question. And again, powerless speech, right? So this is a person who's uncertain. They're making a declaration. It's about time we got started, right? But they're kind of afraid to be that declarative. And so they put a tag question on there for fear that they may be coming off as too bossy or too pushy. Disclaimers. I probably shouldn't say this, but which is probably like a pet peeve of mine. It's very annoying. I see it all the time in like Facebook groups and stuff. And it's really what's coming next. I mean, you could probably say right now, if we were live, what's coming next, because what's coming after the but is critical. And because the person needs a disclaimer, the disclaimer itself speaks to the fact that the person doesn't even think they should have said it in the first place. So that's very powerless. That person does not really want to own what they want to say. And then rising inflections, all those question marks right there are there for a reason. It's because I want you to start listening to people and the way that they talk. you will notice, and maybe you will notice it in yourself as well, that sometimes when you speak, you have a rising inflection. So it sounds like this. When you're talking to someone, you're like, and oh, and I just went to the store yesterday. And so you can see that there's a rising inflection in that last word, making it sound like it's a question, right? So those are habits. These are kind of, linguistic habits that we have that are things we should watch for, because they give an impression of powerless speech. There's also disruptive language, okay? It's on pages 191, 193, but let's just start with the first one, fact, opinion, confusion, and I'll give you examples after I go through these. Facts can be verified while opinions are based on the speaker's beliefs. Okay, so we have encountered so much of that in this last, several years of fact, opinion, confusion. I mean, it has just been very abundant. Then there is fact inference confusion. So I want you to maybe write about these if it'll help you to deeper dive into understanding the difference. That's important. Conclusions arrived at from interpretation of evidence. So inference is like interpretation. Okay, I'll get to an example. The last one is emotive language. A lot of students, I'm going to warn you up front, who didn't kind of grasp the meaning of this, they think of emotive language as emotional language. And if this shows up on the next assessment, I wouldn't want you to get it wrong. It's not just because it says emotive. If you don't know what it means, you're likely to guess that it's some kind of emotional language, but it's not. Okay, what it is it's a word choice which illustrates the speaker's approval or disapproval. So let's go over examples. First of all, fact, opinion, confusion. 1, you didn't study for the exam, you don't care about the class. Okay, so there's a fact that the person didn't study for the class, right? But for me, say as your professor, to draw the conclusion that you don't care about the class, that's my opinion, which is completely unsubstantiated, isn't it? And in no way helpful. 2 is, here's 2 people having conversation. A says, "Why are you mad at me?" And B says, "I'm not mad at you. Why have you been so paranoid lately?" Fact inference is right here. Why have you been so paranoid lately? Right? So this person A is just asking, "Why are you mad at me?" And then person B says, "I'm not mad at you," and they flip it back on the person, right? By making an inference that that person is paranoid. And then the last one, the emotive language, again, remember, the word that the speaker uses demonstrate their attitude toward the speaker or something the speaker is saying. So if they have a positive gestalt, to use a word from a previous chapter, they might use the word progressive, right? If they don't, if they have a negative gestalt, which remember, that's also the halo and horn effect. So, and if they have the horn effect going on with and having a negative gestalt, they're going to use the word radical because they don't approve of the person or their beliefs. We also need to talk a little bit about the differences between genders and language. And I do have to say, though, that just using female and male is a bit outdated in terms of gender identity. And I think you probably agree on that. But we just have to, we can get the point anyway, that depending on your gender identity, language is unique depending on your gender, right? So a female gender type, a person who identifies as female, personal and domestic subjects tend to dominate their language. Relationship problems tend to dominate their language. Family, health, food, and clothing tend to dominate their language, and gossip about close friends and family. Okay. Don't let it offend you if that's not you, because this is being extremely general. The male gender role tends to talk about music. Again, this is so stereotyping, right? Music, current events, sports, business, equally likely in same-sex exchanges to talk like, okay, equally likely in same-sex exchanges, personal appearance, okay, So both gender identities are equally likely to talk about personal appearance, sex, and dating. So both genders. And again, just take it as broad general framework, because there's so much more that could be said about that if we were like in a gender studies class, right? We'd have so much more to expand on with that. Okay, and then of course culture. So recall that, you know, with culture, we're always asking ourselves, what does it mean to a high context culture, and what does it mean to a low context culture? So so a high context culture, they value using language to maintain social harmony. So the content of their language is going to be much more about we and us, right? And the Eastern cultures tend to be more high context cultures. Low context cultures value using language to express thoughts, feelings, and ideas as directly as possible. Remember, these are very low context cultures, like North America, tend to be very individualistic and very self rewarding, like that you know, accomplishment is what's we're focusing on, individual merits and accomplishment, right? Okay, so that is the end of chapter 6, and thank you very much. Be sure and write your summary, and also go to the chapter 6 discussion with the questions from your summary.